All right, so I'm going to start off with a question. This question is not one that you need to raise your hand on. Sometimes I like when you raise your hand. This one, you don't need to. So the question is this: have you ever met somebody, and as soon as you met them, you knew I wasn't going to like them. You just knew I wasn't going to like them. But then, in spite of yourself, like you couldn't help but like them. Maybe it was one of those things that you met them, and personality-wise, it was just kind of like oil and water. It's like, oh, they just don't think and behave the way that I think and behave, and it's just not going to work out. Or maybe it was one of those jealousy things. Have you ever had one of those moments where you haven't even met the person, but everyone keeps telling you how great that person is, and you're just thinking to yourself, nah, he can't be that great. He's not as good. Have you ever had one of those moments, and then you met him, and you're like, darn it, they are that great. And you can't help but like them, and at the same time, maybe you want to be more like them. Maybe for you, it's that person who stopped, right? It's that person who just stopped. It's that person who saw a need and they met the need. It's someone who just opened themselves up and they gave and they didn't actually expect anything in return. It's that person that maybe it was in that season of life where you actually needed a hand up. And you thought that person would notice, and you thought maybe that family member would meet the need, and no one saw it. No one met the need except for he did. She did. And you're like, wow, I never thought that they would do that. And you just now can't help but like them a little bit, and maybe want to be a little bit more like them. I told you how in May our family had the opportunity to actually visit some family in California. We had a Gleason family reunion. I hadn't seen some of this family like 6.5 years. And we had a great week together doing all kinds of fun stuff. And then the very last day, we had the opportunity to go to the beach. And specifically the beach that just our family went to. This was just the immediate family, was Malibu, California. If you're not kind of piecing places together, just know this. Malibu, California is an expensive stretch of the California coast. There's a lot of rich people. There's a lot of wealth in Malibu. So we visited Malibu. It was overcast, and we thought, oh, is this really going to be a nice day? And eventually the skies cleared, and we enjoyed the surf, and we enjoyed the beach, and it was just really fun. And conditions were really good for actually surfing. They have a lot of great waves, and so particularly at this one point, we were just watching these surfers take on these really nice waves. And then as the day progressed, it got a little windier, and so it became really great conditions for windsurfers to go out and kind of do their thing, as well as kite surfers. If you're not familiar with what a windsurfer looks like, so that's windsurfing. Now, I don't really know anything about windsurfing. It seems really cool to me, but also at the same time really complicated. So I'm just watching and enjoying. And as we're watching this one guy, he takes a wave similar to this, and he takes it in, and he takes it pretty far in, and then he turns his sail around to head back out to obviously get some more waves. And I noticed that there's this really big wave that I'm thinking, I don't think he's going to clear this one. I don't think he's going to be able to clear this thing. I think he's going to, this is just going to crash on him. And sure enough, about 2 seconds right before this wave crashes on him, he jumps off the board and he dives underneath the wave, and the wave crashes over him and then takes out his windsurfer or his board and the sail. Now, I do know a little something about surfing. I'm not an expert, but I've done it a few times. Bailing on a wave is normal and it's expected. Like, that's what you're going to do. In fact, you ride a wave while it's cresting, and once it turns into whitewash, which is what you see on, I guess, the right of the screen, you bail on the wave, and then you swim back out with your board and you catch more waves. So it's normal to bail on a wave. But when this guy took a tumble, I noticed that his board was drifting far away from him. And when you're surfing, I don't know about windsurfing, but when you're surfing, you have what is called a leash. And this is something that is attached to your ankle, which is attached to the board, so that when you bail on a wave, your board doesn't just drift out to sea. Now, fortunately for this guy, his board is drifting far, far away from him, but it's getting closer to the shoreline. So I'm thinking, okay, it's not that big of a deal, but he's got to swim. He's going to have to swim for this thing. So he starts swimming after it very slowly. Meanwhile, the board makes its way to the shore, and it's starting to take like a beating from the waves on the shore. And so I turned to my wife and I was like, should I go help? Like, should I drag the board up on the shore? Like, should I do that? And she looked at me and says, I don't know. And I know what she's thinking. She's thinking the exact same thing I'm thinking. She's thinking, we're in Malibu. People in Malibu have really nice stuff. And people who have really, really nice stuff don't want you messing with their really, really nice stuff, right? And so I'm having this, I don't know if I should, and she's thinking, I don't know either. Meanwhile, there is a kite surfer who's way closer to the board and the sail than we are, and he's clearly a local, and he's setting things up, and he's not even out there yet, and he's just kind of doing his thing, and he doesn't lift a finger to help with the board. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna take my cue from that guy, and I'm just gonna let things go. Meanwhile, the surfer eventually gets to his board, he gets out of the water, and you can just tell he's exhausted. Like he's fatigued, and it looks like he's a little upset too. And he's like messing with his board, he's messing with his sail, and you can just tell he's upset. So I was like, guys, I'm gonna go see if I can help. So I run over to him, I was like, hey, is there anything I can do to help you out? And he looks at me, he's an older gentleman, and he looks at me, and the only way to describe the look that he had was disdain. Like he had complete disdain for me. And he looks at me, and he's messing with a part of his mast that had been bent and broken, and he throws it on the ground, and he says, no, I could have used your help about 5 minutes ago. As though I was the one that broke his mast. I was like, whoa, this is a little intense. So immediately I back off, and I'm like, oh man, I am so sorry. I'm definitely willing to help you out now, though. He said, no, stop right there. It's too late for your help. I just don't know how so many people, and he just kind of gestures to the beach, so many people can just stare and watch and not lift a finger to help. I just can't believe that. And so at this point, I apologize again, and I say, oh, I feel like I'm such a jerk. And then I say something that I've never said before. Like I do something that I have never, ever done before in my entire life. I actually chose to use my rich Kentucky roots as an excuse for my inability to help him. I actually spoke these words. Actually, my family and I were visiting from Kentucky. And I just didn't know what the proper protocol was of what was going on, so I didn't want to mess with your board. And again, he softens a little bit, but he's still frustrated. He's still a little upset. He's like, well, if you're from Kentucky, I guess you've got an excuse. At which point, then he says, but these guys, and he says it really loud so that the windsurfer can know he's talking about him, but these guys should know better. And I'm not a young man anymore, and the fact that they wouldn't even lift a finger, and I could tell he's still upset with me too. Like he wants to still be angry with me, and so he's not done with his jabs. He decides to say, here's the thing, if I was visiting Kentucky, and I saw you fall off your horse, because we all have horses, right? And I'm waiting for the next jab, because you were drunk on all your bourbon, or some other stereotype, but it doesn't come. He says, if I saw you fall off your horse, I know I would stop and I would help. And again, I pull back and I say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry for that, but I'm here now and I'm totally willing to help you. Now, it's at this point that you can visibly see the anger subsiding, and he just kind of steps back and says, I'm sorry, man, I'm sorry. You coming up here was super kind, very decent of you. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. Now, he wanted to hate me. He wanted to be angry with me, but he couldn't. And you know why he couldn't? Because all his rich snob friends from Malibu didn't lift a finger to help him, but this Kentucky born and bred native of the bluegrass stopped and helped him, right? Now, for those of you who don't know, I am not originally from Kentucky. I'm actually originally from California, but I hope I made you proud, right? Did I make you guys proud? There's at least one grumpy old guy from Malibu who probably thinks a little bit better of us because of what I did, hopefully, right? I want you to think for a moment about the folks who have come to your rescue over the years. I want you to think about the individuals who saw a need in your life and they met a need in your life. How do you think about them? How do you view them? What is your process of just kind of putting them in certain categories of people that you love? It's probably pretty high, right? And what's interesting is Jesus was that person who came to rescue us. And it's actually that kind of person he calls all of us to be. We're in a series, week 4 actually, of a series called How We Know Why We Believe. And what we're doing in the series is we're examining one of the 4 biographies of Jesus. We have 4 ancient biographies written about the life of Jesus that were actually written in the 1st century and we still have today in the 21st century. And specifically, we're looking at the Gospel of Luke. And in the Gospel of Luke, we have basically a doctor, a surgeon, who has sat down to write about this life ministry of Jesus. And it's one of those things that he did not have in his mind that he was going to be writing the Bible. It wasn't like some book editor came up to him and was like, hey, we've got this plan for this bestseller. It's going to be the bestseller of all time. We want you to be a contributor. See what you can come up with. No. This was an individual who met with the eyewitnesses, who did his research so that one individual by the name of Theophilus would actually have a certainty to what he's been taught about Jesus. That he would know the certainty of the things that he's starting to believe and putting his faith in, and he's got all the puzzle pieces put together. And what's interesting is, if this hadn't had happened, like if the life of Jesus had not have happened, our world would be so much different than what it is. Do you guys realize that it's because of the Christian faith that we have hospitals like you and I enjoy and love today? It's the Christians who actually started the hospital system that we know of today. When you think of other things that adoption and the foster care system, guess what? Adoption has been birthed from the Christian faith as we know of it today. More Christians than anyone else on the planet are engaged in adoption and foster care. It's mind-boggling how it's just such a staggering weighted side of those who are engaged in adoption. When it comes to even the elevation of women and children, the Christian faith has elevated women and children in society like no other people group in the history of the world. When it comes to the most driving force that is trying to abolish slavery for hundreds of years, you know who it's been? Christians. When it comes to people who are more charitable in their giving, every single year, Christians give more than whole countries combined. It's billions and billions in charitable giving. Why? Why is this? Because 2,000 years ago, there's an event that took place. Jesus died on the cross, and then 3 days later, he was seen again. The event is called the resurrection. And from that point on, from the resurrection on, a movement began that started transforming lives to the point where you and I are experiencing that same movement and that same transformation today. And what we're going to be exploring today in Luke's biography is the transformation that takes place when we start loving the way that Jesus has loved us. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 10. I know we're moving right along in the book of Luke. Week 1, we were in chapter 1. Week 2, we were in chapter 3. Last week, we were in 4 and 5. This week, if you don't mind, we're going to be turning to chapter 10, and we're going to start reading in verse 25. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? So there's a lawyer, and he's got a question, and his question is, hey, what do I need to do in order to guarantee that I have a seat in God's kingdom? What do I need to do? And Luke understands that he's testing Jesus, but it's probably not the testing that you naturally think of. This is a testing of, hey, it's not really clear in the law, it's not really clear in the prophets the answer to this question. I've got an answer. I want to know what your answer is. So he's genuinely probably curious what Jesus' answer is going to be. But Jesus, being Jesus, doesn't actually answer directly. He asks his own question. Verse 26, what is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? In other words, you're the expert. You tell me. What does the law say? This is when he answers. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all of your mind. So this lawyer gives the textbook answer. This is the answer that every young Jewish boy and girl were taught since the time they were like this big. This is actually something that is in Scripture. It's known as this prayer that in Hebrew it means the Shema. This is the most important of what you need to do. You need to give God all of yourself. But Jesus was asked this question earlier. In fact, earlier in his ministry, an individual said, hey, Jesus, what's the most important law? Of all the laws, what is most important to God? And Jesus answers with, hey, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. And then he adds something. He adds something that other people were not adding. And he actually takes it from Leviticus chapter 19. He says, and love your neighbor, what? Love your neighbor as yourself, which everyone's like, oh, hey, why did you add that one in there? Why did he add it in there? Here's why. He's saying, hey, the greatest commandment is actually twofold. You already know you're supposed to love God with all of yourself. But what you may not understand is you demonstrate your love for God with how you love others around you. And so this guy, how's he going to answer it?
he says the Shema, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And then he says, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is a wink, wink. I've been paying attention. Wink, wink. Hey, I've been listening. I'm on the same page as you, right? This is the right answer, right, Jesus? And Jesus says, you have answered correctly, because there's a lot of people who do not answer correctly. You nailed it. You got it. Ding, ding, ding. Fantastic. And then he goes on and he says, do this and you will live. If you are genuinely interested in the things of God, if you're genuinely interested in partnering with him, if you're genuinely interested in his kingdom, this is what you need to do. Go and do that. Any other questions, guys? Anything? At this point, he raises his hand again. He's like, well, actually, I've got another one. But he wanted to justify himself. Have you ever been there, by the way? You ever want to justify yourself? You ever thought to yourself, hey, I'm doing these things and I'm not doing these things and I'm not 100% sure I'm right, so I just want to convince you that this is right and I need to know that this is okay. You ever been there? Wanted to justify yourself? That's where he's at. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? How is this a question that is justifying his original question? Who is my neighbor? He's a lawyer, right? Lawyers, they like contracts. They don't like the gray area. They like things black and white. They know that so many people can manipulate things. So he wants to know very specifically, okay, what do I need to do to check this box? Who is my neighbor? Maybe what he's really asking is, how low is that bar? Like, what is the least that I have to do in order to love my neighbor and guarantee myself a seat in God's kingdom? What's the lowest that I can go? When we think of neighbor, I think there's probably certain images that come to your mind. You might actually picture a neighbor like that person that you share a fence with. You know, it's that person who lives across the street from you. Some of you are looking at this idyllic picture and you're thinking, yeah, right, I wish, because the image in your mind is this. Not that one, but this one, right? You've got maybe some bad blood between neighbors. And you're thinking, if God really expects me to love my neighbor, man, I'm hosed. Like, I am absolutely hosed, because it is really difficult to love the people right next to me. And I think what's interesting, too, is this lawyer, and certainly those who were listening to him, they had a similar idea of neighbor. Their idea of neighbor was probably their Jewish brothers and sisters. Like, the neighbors were their fellow Jewish brothers and sisters. It was the people who thought like them. It was the people who worshiped like them. It was the people who dressed like them. It was the people who ate like them, voted like them. Certainly, it wasn't the Roman occupiers. Those aren't neighbors. It wasn't someone of a different ethnicity. Those aren't our neighbors. And so what Jesus is going to do is he's going to completely disrupt our understanding of what neighbor love looks like. In fact, what Jesus is going to do is he's going to, instead of just answering directly, Jesus does what he just does it masterfully. He's going to tell a story. He's going to tell a parable. And this is arguably one of his most disruptive, one of his most culturally insensitive, one of his most paradigm-shifting parables. It's one that you know. It's one that you've probably studied before. But I think we can't overestimate how it's made an impact on our world. Because what Jesus is wanting to answer, he's wanting to answer that question behind the question. He doesn't want to just say, hey, here's your neighbor. What he wants you to understand is what neighbor love actually looks like. He wants you to know, he wants you to see what neighbor love actually does, what it acts like. Because if you're able to know what neighbor love looks like and acts like, you're going to understand what God is like and what God requires of you as well. And so we're going to read this parable that most of you are very familiar with. Verse 30. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. Those who are listening, they know the highway that he's referring to. He's very familiar, everyone who's listening is very familiar with this long stretch, a 17-mile stretch from Jerusalem to Jericho. And this was a stretch of highway that was one of those, everyone knew you had to have a strong sense of awareness while you're on the road. Like, it's like, keep your head on a swivel, because there's bandits and there's other people that would try to do you harm. This is the place where you would go with your pepper spray. You guys know what I'm talking about? You not only have your pepper spray, but maybe you invite a friend or you're on the phone just in case something goes down. Maybe for those of you who, well, are born and bred in Kentucky, this is the place where you're packing, right? You've got your open carry going on, right? That's this road. And sure enough, he runs into trouble. He does not have good situational awareness, and he's attacked, and he's robbed, and unfortunately, he's beaten. Notice they say, that Jesus explains, they stripped him of his clothes. Why? Because clothes are valuable. They beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. Everyone's kind of groaning because they realize this is a bad situation for him. Because if the sun goes down, this guy's probably going to die from exposure or from the wild animals. So this is a bad situation. What's going to happen? Well, fortunately, Jesus talks about these religious leaders showing up. 2 religious leaders actually walk by. This is fantastic, right? These guys are coming from Jerusalem, probably at the temple. They've spent time with God. And so if anyone knows that you're in a right place of mind to serve people, it would be religious folks. And so as they're walking by, they don't help, though. Why? There's all kinds of speculation. It could be the fact that they were ceremonially clean and they didn't want to actually become ceremonially unclean. They might have business in Jericho that would keep them from doing what they're supposed to do. It might be the fact that they're looking at this man thinking, well, he probably gotten himself in this situation because he had some bad business deals, and so he's just getting what he deserves. Maybe it's one of those things that, well, God's punishing him. You know, he sinned in some dramatic way, and so, hey, listen, the law is really clear. We're not allowed to commit murder, but at the same time, you know, we're not actually responsible. We're not responsible for saving somebody. According to the law, we're just obeying the law. We don't know, but they walk on by. Verse 33. But a Samaritan. Now, everyone hearing this would go, oh yeah, Samaritan. I know why the Samaritan's there. Samaritan's showing up because he's the one that actually probably orchestrated this robbery in the first place. And he forgot some piece of evidence behind, and so he's coming back to drag the body away and take the knife, and that's why the Samaritan's there, because the Samaritans were hated by everybody. This is how much Samaritans were hated. Not just those listening, but specifically Jesus' own disciples and his apostles, they hated Samaritans. In the chapter right before this, chapter 9, they're going through Samaria. Jesus and his disciples are going through Samaria, and they're looking for some hospitality from this town in Samaria. And the people in the town say, wait, where are you going? Oh, you're heading up to Jerusalem? Oh, yeah, you're Jewish people? Okay, you can just keep on going. We're not going to be hospitable to you. And what do James and John decide to do? James and John say, hey, Jesus, we hate Samaritans so much. Can you give us permission to pray and call down fire and destruction on this town? Can we just nuke these guys? They're so, they're doing it again. Can we just wipe them out? Which sounds crazy, doesn't it? That sounds insane. Who does that? Who would pray to God just wipe out a whole village? It actually kind of reminds me of my brother. Not to that extreme, but he was telling me the story. He was getting some clothes donated to his family. You know, a friend just had a couple garbage sacks of clothes, and so they were going through it. And one of his kids pulled out this shirt, and it didn't have any lettering, it didn't have any writing, it didn't have any graphics on it. His kid just kind of put it on, and immediately he looked at it. He turned to his wife and he said, "You need to throw that away. You got to throw that thing away." She looks at him like, "Why? It's just a blue shirt." He says, "No, it's not just a blue shirt, honey. That's a Dodger blue shirt. No lettering, no graphics, but just the shade of blue." My brother is a die-hard Giants fan. And just wearing that shade of color, not in his house, which sounds crazy, doesn't it? That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But there's culturally, there's something emotionally going on that you just don't know in the Gleason family. We hate the Dodgers, right? That's just what we do. And it's true also of the Jewish-Samaritan relationship. There's just things going on socially. There's things going on spiritually. They just hate each other. And you know what Jesus is about to do? Jesus is about to make the Dodger fan the hero of the story. He's about to make, maybe for those of you who, you're UK fans, he's about to make the Duke fan, right, the hero. I know, boo, hiss, I know. You put in whatever team you hate. He's about to make that guy the hero of the story. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. We see a shift taking place. This individual who, if we went back to the beginning of the sermon, is the individual that you just don't like. This is the individual who, for whatever reason, maybe it's personality, maybe it's jealousy, you're just like, okay, when I hear that bad things are happening to him, that's actually kind of good news to me. It's like, tell me more. Yeah, I don't like things going well for that guy. This individual is the hero of the story. He looks and he has pity on this man. And then what we're going to see is no fewer than 6 acts of compassion, 6 acts of kindness, 6 acts of love. Notice verse 34. He went to him and bandaged his wounds. What does that mean? It means that he touched him. It means that he actually wiped blood away from the scrapes, the bruises, the gashes, the gouges. I mean, you guys, we all get a little squeamish. Sometimes even our own blood, let alone someone else's. He touched the man. Then he put on the man oil and wine, which means it cost him something. Then he put the man on his own donkey, which means that he was actually inconvenienced, which means he had to walk, which means he went slower and he became far more fatigued. He brought him to an inn and took care of him, at which point everyone who's listening is like, whoa, what now? Wait, he stayed the night? He spent the night at the inn? No, that's crazy. No one would spend the night. This is not a dump and run mission. You guys ever have one of those? You heard a need, you saw a need. There was a big part of you that wanted to help meet the need, but you just didn't have the time. And so what did you do? You got out your checkbook. And you're like, okay, this will solve it really, really fast, and I don't really have to get my hands dirty. I'm just going to write this check really quick. Now, there's nothing wrong with writing checks, but that's not what this man does. What this man does is he spends the night, and he nurses this other individual back to health. The next day, he took out 2 denarii. And everyone's saying to themselves, 2 denarii, 2 denarii. Oh my gosh, he's spending how much? I mean, that's like the equivalent of 2 weeks' worth of room and board. That's 2 weeks' worth of hospital bills. No one spends that kind of money on anyone. He took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. This is where everyone's mind is absolutely blown. He says, look after him, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Jesus, he's coming back? Like, this guy's coming back? He's coming back just to, like, maybe settle the potential of more costs being occurred because of, dealing with this guy's illnesses and his wounds? No one does that. Hey, Jesus, if you want to just tell a story that none of us are going to believe, how about the next time you tell the story, you make this guy's donkey a unicorn, right? Then it's like, hey, it's just a fanciful story. Like, the next time, instead of oil on wounds, he sprinkles fairy dust, because no one's believing the story. No one behaves this way. No one acts that way. And then it's at this point that things really shift. It's at this point that Jesus is going to shift our understanding of what neighbor love looks like for the next 2,000 years. It redefines how we interact with each other. It redefines neighbor, because most of us, we think of neighbor as, well, it's people who think like us. It's people who worship like us. It's people who have the same values as us. It's people who vote like us, have graduated that same school as us, who live across the street from us. And Jesus says, no, neighbor love doesn't look like that. Let me explain to you what neighbor love is. And how does he do this? How does he redefine this for the next 2,000 years? He asks one question. He asks one carefully designed, perfectly placed question. You guys ready to hear what the question is? The reason I'm asking you, if you're ready to hear what the question is because when I ask it, when we read it, you're going to have an impulse in you to answer the question. And if you answer the question, you will actually be held accountable to your answer. And some of the things, some of the implications, you don't necessarily want to be held accountable to. But I'm going to read it anyway, so here we go. What does it say? What is the question? Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Which one? Which one? Which one? See, what Jesus is really asking, though, let's go a little bit deeper. What Jesus is really asking is, okay, which out of these 3 men love God with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their strength, with all their mind, by demonstrating their love for God by actually helping a stranger? Which one? Which one? Now, the lawyer's in a tricky spot because the lawyer knows tricky questions, gotcha questions. The lawyer understands, those questions that are loaded, and he doesn't want to be put in a corner because he doesn't want to be held accountable necessarily. So how's he going to answer this question? He can't get around it much. Verse 37, the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Now, did you catch that? The one. The one who had mercy. Was it a Samaritan? No, I totally forgot if it was a Samaritan. Like he can't even be motivated enough to actually name this guy. It's not a Samaritan, it's the one, right? Can't say it's the Dodger fan, can't say it's the Duke fan. It's like it's the one who was like super kind and super nice. That's how he answers it. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. Hey, when you see a need, go ahead. Go and do likewise. When you can give of yourself, go and do likewise. Now, how is this completely reframed how we view and how we interact with neighbor love? What we see is Jesus says there are no boundaries to neighbor love because there are no boundaries to God's love for us. But what do we want to do? If you're like me, we want to pull back and we say, yeah, but how far do we take that? Like, how far do we take that, Jesus? Because that's tricky. Like, what if it's going to cost me too much? And what if the time that I have, how far do I have to take it? How far do I have to take this? What do we want to do? We want to justify ourselves, don't we? But let me say this. If you're at a point in your life, and I think if you're not, you might find yourself there at some point. So hear me out. If you're at a point in your life where your Christian faith has gotten a little boring, that maybe just being a part of Christian community has gotten a little boring, a little stale, if you're at a point where maybe you're even starting to kind of walk away from your faith, maybe you're finding yourself just having all these questions and all these doubts, and you're like, I don't even know if I want to give my life to this anymore. My guess is you're not going and doing likewise. My guess is all of this boredom, all of this, I'm just not really into it anymore, is because you're not going and doing likewise. Something that's been really neat this summer is I've seen so many of you serving in this way. Just to give you an example of what I mean by this, a couple weeks ago I had the opportunity to gather with a good number of students in our church. And one of the things we did was we went around and we talked about the highlight of the summer, the low light of the summer, and then we added one. You guys ever do the high-low, by the way? You kind of know how that works. And then we added a third one, and we called it a His light, His light. Where in the summer have you seen God at work? Where has His activity been? And almost without question, every single one of those students focused on the highlight being that they've been a part of Christian community in one form or fashion. And then when they got to the His light, almost without question, they all focused on certain level of ministry that they've been able to engage in and feel life and feel significance from. And every one of those students were expressing their excitement for their Christian faith, for their Christian journey. Why? Why is this? Because they were going and they were doing likewise. And this is what happens. This is what happens. And so the challenge that I have for you is just to evaluate. We talk about loving the Lord your God with all of yourself. How do you demonstrate that? You demonstrate it for your love, your fellow man. And so what do we need to do? We need to go and do likewise. Let's pray. Father God, I want to thank you for the example of the Samaritan. We know it's just a story, but in actuality, this is exactly what you did for us. It's a story that you lived out faithfully. Your son Jesus gave it all so that we could have life, so that we could be rescued from the world that has beaten us and robbed us and has left us for half dead. But you took that punishment on yourself on the cross. And we just want to say thank you, and we want to praise you for it. It's in your son's name we pray.